Today, in our first episode of the Quarantine Sessions, we will begin the first of a three-part series with former frontman of the band Collapsis and guitar for the band Athenaeum, Mike Garrigan, where we will hear some new live performances, talk about his older bands, his writing style, and what his upcoming plans are. I hope you enjoy the first episode of the Quarantine Sessions. All right, first off, man, when did you start playing?
Playing guitar? Well, I attempted to play the guitar when I was like 7. It wasn't going too well. I learned how to play a D chord. But, I, I was reflecting on this recently. The first song I learned how to play was La Bamba, but it wasn't the Richie
Wow.
Valens version. It was the Los Lobos version. So, like, I grew up listening to that soundtrack from the movie from the 80s. I'm like, man, this is great. And the Valens version is a little more rockin',
Yeah.
But anyway, I learned it because I was asked to play at school when I was in the 7th grade for music class. And I did that, and it was terrifying. I was like, I can't do it. And I know I played horribly, but it's like the fact that I tried, people were very supportive of it. And then we started a band. Me and my friends started a band after that. And so this was in the 7th grade, and that's when I started playing.
Cool. So you've always wanted to be a musician, were you
Yeah.
wanting to do songwriting in the 7th grade?
I didn't think about it. I mean, my mom had me writing songs when I was like 5 years old on the piano. She's like, write something. And I wrote this song called The Tired Sneaker. It was like,
Hey,
something,
hey, do
something
you
like that.
remember it?
No, I wish
You,
I didn't know how to write sheet music at the time, but this is my song. It was called The Tired Sneaker. And I wish I remembered it. It's probably okay,
we, that's a re-release right there.
Yeah. But what had happened was I began writing in earnest, like I think around the 9th grade, 10th grade, sort of reflecting on just all the changes that were going on. And I started writing at first, just like aping the music I liked and listened to, like Pearl Jam and Alice in Chains, writing songs like those. And then I felt like when I got into college and started playing out on the scene, I developed my own sound.
Mm. When did you start college?
93.
Okay, cool. And so at what point did you really think that could become a career for you, that music could?
I think it was when I released my second full-length album, Lessons of Autumn.
Okay.
We had just done a big show at the Cat's Cradle, this club in Chapel Hill, right outside of Chapel Hill in Carborough, and I'd sold out the club. It's a big club, And I remember taking all the money I made after paying all the musicians a good amount of money that night, just still having a whole bunch left over, and going, you know what, this could happen, this could work.
So who were the musicians you played with that night?
It was Nick Brown and Mark Cano from the original Atlantic Records lineup of Athenaeum, and played with John Gillespie, who's a songwriter from Chapel Hill. He had been teaching high school for the past 20 years. He's now retired, believe it or not, but he played bass. And we had Margaret White, who went on to have an incredible career in the indie world. She played violin on a couple of the more acoustic tracks. But we did 2 sets. We had a little mini orchestra for one, and then the rock show after that, the rock set.
Hey, that's awesome.
But
So,
it felt like, wow, this isn't just something that's a hobby. If I were to tune this right and pursue it, I think something could happen. And for Athenaeum, not a year later, they were signed to Atlantic Records. So the guys in my band were getting signed. Why can't I get signed? And it happened that way. So,
okay, so this happened before Athenaeum actually got signed by
yeah.
Atlantic. Okay, cool.
And their whole thing about playing with me, they liked my music, and we were all hanging out. We were friends. We met at a barbecue at John's house, 4th of July, and I just started sitting around playing songs. Like, you know what? We're all pretty good. We should do a little group of some kind.
Yeah.
And so they played on my songs and John's songs, he was also a songwriter, because they were about to go record. They knew they were getting signed, but they needed practice in the studio. So Nick showed up and knocked out Lessons of Autumn in an afternoon. It was incredible to watch a drummer do that. I mean,
Yeah.
since then I've done many an album, and I've never seen somebody with that much focus and intensity play that well.
Mm-hmm.
But they did the same for John, and John and I were both, shopping our music to different companies by the late 90s. And so Collapsis formed out of that, and the rest is history.
So what happened? I know building a hole was mainly your first album, right?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So the approach you took on building a hole to Lessons of Autumn, I mean, was Lessons of Autumn intended originally to be similar to building a hole, or
No,
what changed there?
well, I think the thing for me was, building a hole it really captured what was going on in the Chapel Hill small club scene, for me, and what I was doing when I would go. For example, I had an opportunity to open for Ani DeFranco uh, at the Duke Coffee House one time, and in my mind, I was playing these rock songs, but in actuality, I was playing them through just a solo guitar and screaming my head off. So it kind of worked in a way. In my mind, I was making a certain sound, but what was coming out was something different. And we captured that on Building a Hole with really intense doubled guitars and, vocals. They had like 5 compressors on my voice in line just to make sure I didn't blow out the tape deck, and so that's what Building a Hole was. But then once that was done, when I was talking with John and Mark and Nick, like, man, you need to go in and make a record with John Plymel, because the difference between John Plymel and Conrad Hunter, who recorded Building a Hole, was that Plymel was more of a producer. He's like, okay, let's break this down and see, how is this going to sound? What do you want it to sound like? And for me, it was just like Kid in a Candy Store. Everything was overdubbed, and I could play sticks on the floor instead of a drum or something. And eventually we decided to replace all of the weird experimental stuff with just Mark and Nick doing something traditional, and it came out really well.
So when you went in to do Lessons of Autumn, did
Mm-hmm.
did you ever really have the intention of doing an album for every season, or did it just kind of become that after Lessons of Autumn?
It came out afterwards. Lessons of Autumn was written during a really challenging time for me. It was my first experience with growing close to somebody, um, romantically, on a spiritual level, on a friendship level, in all ways that someone can know somebody, and it totally going away and being pulled out from under me in a way that I didn't want to happen. So that's the lesson that I was trying to come to terms with, in that, with things sort of coming to an end that you cherish. And so I didn't have an intention of writing the other seasons, but after that record was a success, I thought, you know what, I think I should endeavor to write those records. And I did. They ended up being recorded sort of backwards, where the record I did after Autumn was Summer, and the record after Summer was Spring, and then finally I closed it out with Winter. And each of those records was a challenge, and they reflect not only where I was at the time, but the theme I was thinking about, whatever the season presented.
Yeah. So do you think, as a writer, because I know many people have different ways of doing this, do you feel that you're more of a songwriter that focuses first on the meaning of the song and where the song's going that way, or do you feel like you're more of a melodical writer that, here's the melody of the song, here's the song, I'm going to write some words over top of it? Or and do you and the other part of that is, when you start an album, do you feel like, I'm going to write an album that, this, from front to back actually means something? It's got a message as an album in some way. Or are you one of the people that write 50, 60 songs and say, okay, that one sound good together, like a big buffet of songs? And
Yeah.
and they sonically work as an album.
Yeah, I'm more of an album guy. I
Mm.
grew up listening to concept records like Sergeant Pepper and like Animals by Pink Floyd, and even like Automatic for the People. Those they have sort of an overarching cloud to them, if that makes sense, like where there's this definite theme to the whole project, and I like approaching writing that way. When I was in school recently, I wrote a record, and all of the songs are about being at sea. It's like, I don't know why that happened. That's what
Hey.
I got, so and the whole thing was written on a piano. So it's a very process wise, it was different, but also it reflects sort of what I was feeling at the time. We talked about building a whole briefly, and it was a record that was very, if there can be an aggro acoustic record, that's it. It's very aggressive. Um, but over time, there are some songs in there that have sort of evolved and changed, and this is one of my favorite ones from that record. It's called Orange. Where he's building a hole and he's falling down away from this crowd. He's building a hole and he's falling down away from here. And he likes the consequences. He's thinking thirsty quenches, orange hand and finger. And he likes the consequences. He's thinking thirsty quenches, orange hand and finger. Well, I'm falling down in this pleasure kingdom where all is crowned, and there's not enough time for two-faced, not enough face to erase, so he takes to this time away. And he's driving his car too fast to see away from this town. He's driving his car too fast to see until a crash hand takes away. And he likes the consequences. He's thinking thirsty quenches, orange hand and finger. And he likes the consequences. He's thinking thirsty quenches, orange hand and finger. Well, I'm falling down in this pleasure kingdom where all is crowned, and there's not enough time for two-faced, not enough faith to erase, so he takes to this time away.
An awesome version of that song.
Cool. Thank you.
I've heard it a bunch of different ways. Obviously, the piano's becoming one of your.
I'm trying to, Chip, I think it's important for me, I'm saying just for me to grow as an artist. And I feel like when I play the piano, I'm my first couple gigs in a club with a guitar. It's like, I'm not very good at it, but I'm okay enough to pull it off. And, but it keeps it fresh. It helps
Yeah.
me reimagine the songs and keep them alive for myself.
Yeah, that's one thing. We have a piano that we inherited from my dad when he passed away, and it's like I'll get on there and kind of goof around, or the kids will run up and bang on it while I'm trying. I'm like, oh, I think I can do this, and then my wife jumps on it and she teaches music lessons and
And she's
actually knows how to play
flawless.
it.
Flawless.
Yeah, so I on occasion I get to I know basic chords on it though. So, but man, it looks like you're doing very good on this.
It helps me not get it helps me stay grounded because I know I make mistakes a lot more on the piano. And guitar, it's something I've been doing for, gosh, over 30 years. So, I mean, I know that instrument
Yeah.
pretty well, and I don't dislike it, but it's not as much of a challenge to play these songs on a guitar as it is on the piano. So
Like you said, on the guitar version of Orange, we'll go back to that. It does sound a whole lot different than it does on piano. What were you going through during that time, if you don't mind me asking?
I wrote that song when I was a senior in high school, and I
Wow.
had a friend that was getting away with all kinds of stuff, just like living fast, man, in high school, which is not a good idea because a lot of the times, you're not an adult yet because you're under 18 and you just what's the right word? Uh, Invincible, And so I was watching him going down the tubes, but for some reason he never went down the tubes. He always survived unscathed. He got away with things, and he was just living fast, And the idea for the song came from one time we were all at the beach, like in Wilmington, which is in North Carolina. It's about 2 hours from where I went to high school, and we're there, and I'm talking. I mean, I had this big ego in high school, and I had, because I was, a good student, had a lot going on that was good, and I was talking about myself, and he literally came up to me and pulled my pants down in front of everybody. So I'm sitting there in what God had given me, and I'm naked, and I'm going, damn it. And there's a third verse on the Building a Hole about that, where I'm reflecting on that, and then from there, somehow he is always represented in my music whenever there's a color. So Purple, that was on Lessons of Autumn, is another song about him, where 2 years later he drove from Texas, where he was in school, like 20 hours straight, and came to my dorm room and told me all about how his girlfriend had broken up with him. So I wrote the song Purple about that.
Oh, wow.
And it's just like, did you think you might have wanted to stop? Or like, he's like, nope, I had to come straight here. It's like, all right, well, tell me what happened, And then 2 years after that, he was getting into some stuff, and so I wrote Chartreuse for him. And that's a different song altogether, but
Yeah.
those color songs are sort of his narrative. And he hasn't been in my life since then. He's still alive and well. He's doing great, but he's just sort of somebody that was interesting to write about, for sure.
Thanks again for checking out the first episode of the Quarantine Sessions and the first part of my interview series with Mike Garrigan. Join us next time as we talk more about the history of Collapsis, Athenaeum, and several other things about the music industry, all while getting to hear some more live music from Mike. Thanks.
She's just a girl, and he don't know what to do. He spent